As I started talking to some of the founders of Go to Movement and WEC Method and functional patterns, and a large emphasis was placed on paying attention to evolutionary biomechanics. For human beings in general, as a species, we're bipedal locomotive creatures, meaning we have contralateral movements with our gait cycle. We're standing on 2 feet. Our glutes are designed for forward propulsion, not for thrusting a barbell off the ground, with your back on a bench. Our structure is supposed to support ourselves in a particular posture with even distribution of tensions and compressions with our fascial system. And so we have a tensegral structure that allows us to stand with an even distribution of forces so that our joints are compressed. And then our shoulders, as compared to other great apes that are more specialized towards brachiation, which is swinging from branches and climbing trees, human beings have shoulders that are more oriented towards the elastic recoil in gait and in throwing. So we can throw better than most apes. We can throw farther, harder than any other ape, I think, in the great ape kingdom. Now, since then, as you said, there's an over-encompassing connection to your psychological and your spiritual well-being tied into your body. And there's all kinds of other elements that I would start to add in terms of first principles of functionality. There's all kinds of systems in the body beyond just the biomechanical realities of standing, walking, running, throwing as primary functions, and then maybe climbing and lifting and carrying as secondary functions. There are breathing. There is nervous system states. There are the vestibular systems and your ocular system, and all these other systems in your body that make up the entire unit and all have their own unique set of functions that are all connected to the function of everything else. Having a unified definition of functionality is really, really difficult, especially because the human body is incredibly complex and interconnected.
First of all, the word functional fitness is being overused and bastardized. Everybody who picks up a kettlebell, they call it functional. The misconception with functional movement is that it's just a full body exercise. It's narrow-sighted. It's only considering one aspect of what function means. The example I mostly use with people is of a car. The function of a car is to get you from point A to point B. You can drift with a car. You can do all these crazy tricks with it, you can do donuts, but that is not using the function of the vehicle itself, right? And so when we think about humans and every other animal, their main objective is survival. And so we think, how do we survive?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast with myself, Anthony Manuele. My good friend is joining me today, Ali Ziaei, who is the founder of the Sapien Evolution Temple in Montreal. He is a movement coach. He is also probably one of the best personal trainers and dudes to talk about functional fitness and movement with on planet Earth, in my humble, earnest opinion. And we're going to be reviving some of these conversations that I used to have about functional fitness and biomechanics, where we were trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement biomechanics and what it means to live and be in a human body. Those former conversations on the Art of Move podcast with Dr. William Raybar, that was something that I loved doing. And I'm finding myself still having all these conversations all the time, mostly with Ali now. And I love his perspectives. I love what he's up to. I think he's probably one of the most committed, dedicated people to figuring this stuff out on planet Earth. And I just love him. I love his ideas. He's a brother to me, and I'm stoked to have these conversations with him. And today what we're going to do is we're going to do what we did on the first episode of The Art of Move, which is we define what functional fitness is. And we're going to be doing it from a more holistic perspective than maybe what I thought of like a couple years back when I first did this episode. We're going to take a very holistic approach. We're going to define both functional and fitness, and then what those terms mean together, and kind of look at some of the different angles that we maybe missed or ignored when we were first talking about it on the Art of Move. So Ali, I'd love your perspective, man. First of all, thanks for doing this with me. I'm stoked that we're starting these conversations up and that you and I are going to be jamming out on this topic because I love talking to you about it. And then I'd love to know, just off the top of your head, as your working definition, how would you define functional fitness?
First of all, thanks for this opportunity. It's all the stuff you said about the love is definitely mutual. I love the conversations. And as for the definition of functional fitness, I think first We have to define what function means, and then we have to get into the definition of fitness. Because most people associate fitness with something physical, where in reality it's beyond that. It's your mental, your spiritual well-being as well, and it all kind of combines together. So I think the first thing we should talk about is probably what we mean by function. What does functional mean? And then move on to what does fitness mean.
And when I was starting this podcast, kind of where my angle started to gravitate towards, especially as I started talking to some of the founders of Go to Movement and WEC method and functional patterns, and a large emphasis was placed on paying attention to evolutionary biomechanics, which is looking at the human body, how it was designed or evolved to move, and prioritizing the principal mechanical functions of how it moves through and makes sense of space. And so, you look at the body parts and the systems of the body and how were those designed? What was their primary intention for evolving or being there in the first place? And in human beings, for human beings in general as a species, we're bipedal locomotive creatures, meaning we have contralateral movements with our gait cycle. We're standing on 2 feet, so our glutes are designed for forward propulsion, not for thrusting a barbell off the ground, with your back on a bench. They're for sprinting and running and walking, and our structure is supposed to support ourselves in a particular posture with even distribution of tensions and compressions with our fascial system. And so we have a tensegral structure that allows us to stand with an even distribution of forces so that our joints are compressed. And then our shoulders, as compared to other great apes that are more specialized towards brachiation, which is swinging from branches and climbing trees, human beings have shoulders that are more oriented towards the elastic recoil in gait and in throwing. So we can throw better than most apes. We can throw farther, harder than any other ape, I think, in the great ape kingdom. And human sapiens just have that unique set of mechanical functions as it pertains to that. And so that's kind of where, with the art of move, with all those conversations from the functional fitness perspective, I switched from kind of going from the CrossFit mentality or the conventional weightlifting mentality of like, it's a lunge, hinge, squat, vertical and horizontal press and push. That was, for me before, like that, those were the, and then you have rotation and you have, but like it was very, very broken down into single plane and like rudimentary multiplanar movement, as opposed to sort of an integrated approach that considers the first foundations of these evolutionary biomechanics. Now, since then, as you said, there's an over encompassing connection to your psychological and your spiritual well-being tied into your body. And there's all kinds of other elements that I would start to add in terms of first principles of functionality. There's all kinds of systems in the body beyond just the biomechanical realities of standing, walking, running, throwing as primary functions, and then maybe climbing and lifting and carrying as secondary functions. There are breathing, there is nervous system states, there are the vestibular systems and your ocular system, and all these other systems in your body that make up the entire unit and all have their own unique set of functions that are all connected to the function of everything else. And so having a unified definition of functionality is really, really difficult, especially because the human body is incredibly complex and intricate and interconnected. So first off, do you differ in your definition from anything that I've spoken about so far, or would you add anything that from what I've spoken about so far?
No, I don't differ from it. I do. So when it comes to, first of all, the word functional fitness has been is being overused and bastardized. If everybody who picks up a kettlebell, they call it functional, and there's all these CrossFit hit gyms showing up calling themselves functional gyms. And I think what they're missing, I think a lot, the misconception with functional movement is that it's just a full body exercise. And that is where most people, that is only, it's narrow sighted. It's only considering one aspect of what function means. The example I mostly use with people is of a car. You know, the function of a car is to get you from point A to point B. Now, you can drift with a car, you can do all these crazy tricks with it, you can do donuts, but that is not using the function of the vehicle itself, right? And so when we think about the humans and every other animal, their main objective is survival. And so we think, how do we survive? We survive through these functions that you mentioned, right? So we survive through running, either to a prey or from a predator. We survive by standing and walking, you know, going to get food or water or whatever. And we survive through throwing. You know, we got to hunt, we got to fight others. You know, they call believe it or not, throwing a punch and throwing a ball and throwing a spear are all very similar mechanics.
Mm.
So when you think of it, the function, as you would define a car, the function of a car is to get you from point A to point B. The function of a human being is, just like every other animal, is survival. However, the mechanics is what matters. So if you think about, um, let's say, for example, a lot of people use like a thruster as a functional movement. So the thruster is when you have the weight in front of you in a barbell and you squat all the way down and you get up and you press it. Now, based on this definition that I just gave, imagine a predator is coming after you. Are you going to thruster your way out of trouble, you know, or are you going to run, or are you going to pick up a rock and hit it, you know? So I think when it comes to defining function, we have to kind of think in the sense of like, what is this car that we have? What is this vehicle? Uh, how is this vehicle designed to survive? And then those are the functions. Those are the movement objectives of us as an organism.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that and this is where some of the debate around what functional fitness can be defined as is the carryover effects from certain strength training exercises, right? When in the functional fitness community, the back squat and the deadlift are often talked about as movements that people should kind of avoid because the gait cycle is a contralateral movement, it's more unilateral, and then we're doing these bilateral things that compress our spine, and they have more detrimental effects on our movement patterns that are our native movement patterns, native being to our evolutionary biology. But then, proponents of movement optimism or people who are from the conventional strength and conditioning world will say, well, no, if you have better force output in a squat and you have better resilience in these movements, then you'll be able to run faster. You'll be able to accomplish certain tasks better because you have better strength overall and you're teaching your body to handle these loads and handle these forces. And so, the idea that we're, as human beings, our principal objective as a species is to survive, right? And the way that we achieved survival, from our early past was, we had very, very rough ancestry, according to historians and anthropologists. We had to, like you said, throw spears and pick up rocks and try to run away from creatures. And, a lot of evolutionary biologists suggest that human beings were kind of endurance running creatures because we have these sweat glands that allow us to cool our bodies uniquely to other creatures, and we can run and endure long distances more than most animals in the animal kingdom. And so running, even at like slow, moderate paces, is kind of one of the things that human beings are uniquely adapted to. And so in terms of that, how do you approach training to optimize for those functions? And is doing other conventional stuff, does that detract from that? And how does that detract from it?
Well, I think for me and my clients, mostly the priority is to have a functional human being, meaning like based on the things that we define: running, walking, and throwing, to have a person comfortably be able to effectively and efficiently perform these movements. Now, when you think about something that is outside of these movements, when you think about the mechanics of these movements, you kind of have to consider what the set principle, which is that our body adapts to imposed demands. Okay, so the more I ask my body to do this, whatever this is, it becomes better at more efficient at doing this. But there's a cost, right? And the cost is losing its ability to do this, for example. I'm just using my fingers, but the point is that you have to consider what is the cost of doing each exercise, of doing movement. So when you talk about deadlifts and squats, um, they really do develop a bilateral, firm on the ground kind of stance. And while that might be good for certain things, it does have a cost of not allowing your body to rotate and have contralateral reciprocation, right?
And I will
Because you're
say that,
using.
like, I have firsthand experience in that, having specialized in bilateral strength training for a long time. And then the thing that I struggled most with, especially because I was focusing so much on bracing and creating, midline stability and intra-abdominal pressure in one plane of movement, like I got fairly strong and fairly effective at moving a barbell up and down and, forward and backwards. But when it came to rotation and actually like moving in multiple planes and allowing my hips to rotate in different directions and having a bit of elasticity, these things all suffered, and I had to build them up over several years. A lot of the I kind of, I want to say, like, almost like stiffened up towards my midline to create the stability required to endure some of the axial compression of having heavy back squats and of deadlifts.
Mhm.
So that was a movement reality for me. And the other thing that Will and I used to talk about a lot is how much a heavy movement has a demand on your nervous system. And so when your nervous system is experiencing that level of stress, your nervous system is experiencing that level of load, you can have less repetitions. One argument that I hear from people about lifting not deconditioning your gait pattern is that, well, you do thousands of reps a day of walking. You're taking steps every single day when you walk, versus, you could be doing like 25 reps of a squat in any given workout. So you could be doing like, 100,000 steps versus, let's call it like 25 to 70 repetitions of a squat and a deadlift, or these other patterns. But the difference between the repetition of a step versus the repetition of a deadlift is the neurological intensity and the presence that you have in dealing with a certain external force. And so you're conditioning your nervous system to handle these external forces in a very, very particular way, especially when the situation gets stressful. That's going to be what your nervous system defaults to when it's in an emergency setting. That's what you conditioned your body. That's how you conditioned your body to handle those situations. And so I remember when I was, into powerlifting and into, deadlifting and squatting a lot, I handled all of my situations, all of my physical movements. I would try to turn into a hip hinge or a squat to deal with them. And it didn't work in a lot of cases. I was trying to activate my glutes when I was hiking in the same way that I would do in like a squat or a lunge or a deadlift. And I was trying to think of my posterior chain in terms of that
Mm.
type of movement. And like you said, I was very heel heavy, very, I was very energy inefficient because I was stiff and I was over exaggerating and I was over muscling every step that I took. And it was a very inefficient way to hike. And I was
Mhm.
strong, but I would fatigue very easily. And I just was not, I didn't have the, let's call it, biomechanical efficiency required for me to trundle forward and actually like enjoy my strength, enjoy my body.
Yeah, and that goes to that goes to the definition of fitness, right? Like when you talk about fitness, yeah, sure, you could do a few plates on each side of back squats, but again, going back to the functions of a human being, if you were all of a sudden on a hike and you had to survive, how fit are you for that? You know, how fit are you on just like and like you said, running is something we do. If you're an active person, at least 10,000 repetitions a day, right? So, or sorry, walking is something that you do 10,000 repetitions of every day. And it's like, how much is your training contributing to making you fit for something that you will be doing every day until the end of your life, right? And so when you think, like, when I've seen, I mean, you can see it in CrossFit competitions, or you watch powerlifters and bodybuilders run, and first of all, their form, they're just like, they look like a block just rocking side to side. And then aside from that, you can see the struggle in their face, right? Like they are really, you can tell that they're in pain, right? So to me, it's like it again goes back to the definition of fitness, of like, and when we talk about functional fitness, how fit are you in performing these functions that are very necessary, that have been, maybe today they won't be, and I mean, I can argue that they are still necessary. If you don't walk, if you're a couch potato, you're probably not going to live that long, right? So at the end of the day, it's still necessary for you to have these functions. And like, I mean, we see it with a lot of bodybuilders. They end up with back problems and not being able to, you know, surgery, hip replacement, knee surgery, this and that. And it's like by the age of 60, they're bedridden and they're not able to do anything. So are they really fit? Are they, you know, is that considered fit? And going back to the intensity thing, I mean, I work out pretty intensely. You know, I used to be a fighter. I used to fight on national and international levels, and I used to go pretty hard, you know, and there was a need for it. And even to this day, there are days that the boys get together and we just want to, like, you know, have a hard session and we go for it. However, I guarantee you, a lot of people who are doing it are not ready for it, you know, so they jump into these super intense exercises, and then they get hives on their skin, and I've seen it happen. You know, if it's too hard for them, they, you know, they have to go to sleep and they don't wake up for hours, you know, like immediately after the gym. Signs that show you that they've shocked their nervous system, that their body is not able to handle it. And so I think there is benefit to intensity. However, your body needs to be ready for it. However, and for you to achieve that, you need to take the basics down first, which is the functions of the human body. Like, are you able to walk efficiently for 10,000 or more steps? Are you able to run are you able to sprint properly without pain? Are you able to just stand up and not have back pain? Are you able to throw something with your left hand and right hand equally, you know? And once you have that, once you're in a state of being able to do all these things, then you can increase intensity, or at least maybe not all the way, maybe not 100% you're there, because nobody really is. But like, you know, you have a basic fundamental, uh, you have the basics, you're fundamentally there, and then you can, you know, you can go for an intense session.
So I'm going to define fitness then as the readiness to accomplish particular tasks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're defining functional fitness as in like the readiness to accomplish tasks that are relative or specific to human functionality, human biomechanics, human function, baseline human function. And then beyond that if you want to define fitness as things outside of that, like above and beyond the functional foundations, then you can kind of look into specialized fitness and recognize it as specialized, right? And
Yeah.
this is an interesting conversation that's sort of come up in the functional fitness space recently, is, you know, where weightlifting and conventional strength training has been touted as something that actually exacerbates problems. It's something that creates more joint dysfunction, especially if you have, if you have poor structure, if you have a history of misalignment, if you have any degree of scoliosis, then doing some unilateral or single plane movements for weightlifting and these conventional strength training things, these exacerbate your problems. And more recently, rather than demonizing weightlifting altogether, weightlifting is kind of entering the conversation within the functional fitness sphere again, saying it's not weightlifting that's bad. It's specifically not addressing your functional foundation before you do it. And then when you've addressed your functional foundation, then weightlifting without pain and weightlifting progressively is actually a sign of hardiness and resiliency and can be beneficial. Now, I think there's nuance within that. I think the ability to lift weights, and you kind of see examples of this where athletes who had tremendous mechanics, like exceptional mechanics, could do a lot of weightlifting without injury. And they had great structure and they had great, like their structure was sound, and they were able to push their bodies to absolute limits in the weight room as well as the field of whatever game or sport that they were playing. But those are rare exceptions. It seems like it's the exception as opposed to the rule. You know what I mean? And so I like this idea of having, because this was also my experience. I spent years building out more of a functional baseline of focusing on my gait mechanics and fixing how I walked and how I ran and how my posture was. And I fixed my structure. I still am working on my structure. I'm still working on all those things, mind you. But when I addressed that as I had a full year where I stopped doing any other training and I was just focusing on fixing that. And then, I would start adding in a little bit of calisthenics here and there, but like not a lot. I wasn't doing a lot, but still the priority for like 75 to 85% of my training was still oriented around specifically trying to address my functional foundation. And what I noticed is when I started trying new hobbies, things like rock climbing and things like, when I got back into hiking, when I started trying other sports and other things, like I got into rock climbing and I was quite good at it very quickly, despite, and I have my strength background and everything, but I hadn't done real strength training other than a bit of calisthenics in almost 2 years. And my body, which had this foundation, was able to branch out and start to tackle these more specialized problems and these novel situations that it had to be in. So I was able to adapt to fitness because I was branching out from this broader baseline that I was able to build for myself. I did notice that the more that I specialized in rock climbing and the less that I addressed my functional foundations, the more problems I had. Like I started to have some like knee and hip problems because of the different, you're also in chronic flexion of the spine when you're rock climbing. You're kind of like, it's interesting because I like a hyper observe everyone in their mechanics now that I've been studying this for, the last couple of years. And I noticed that, most female rock climbers in particular, I noticed it on some men too, but like most female rock climbers have this same sort of pattern in their lower back and in their hips in terms of like hypermobile hips and unstable lumbar spines, to the point where you can actually, you can see the vertebrae of their lumbar spines kind of jutting out a little bit from the chronic flexion that they're in and from the lack of posterior chain stability that they create as a result of just the positions that they find themselves in over and over again. So I think it's interesting because people who enjoy certain activities can definitely enjoy the activities with less risk of injury, less risk of dysfunction, and less risk of the activity messing them up if they address their foundational function first. But then the further they get into specialization outside of that, the more they're going to end up paying. Yeah. What's your take on some of the people who are talking more about like, well, you can weightlift and weightlifting is actually good for you if your foundational function is aligned first?
Well, this is, in my opinion, you cannot cheat the set principle. There is no there's no way around it. You know, it's what you focus on the most, right? And I personally, and with my clients, we kind of keep an 80-20 rule, you know, 80% on foundations and 20 on, I call, so, you know, in the movement world, I have two ways of thinking about movement. There's artistic movement, artistic expression of movement, and then there is like, you know, your training or core training, trying to be a fit human. So 80% of my training goes to keeping my foundation strong. And the 20% is what I spend doing boxing, dancing, whatever I like to do. You know, for you, it's rock climbing. But if I spend more time on the artistic expression, for some people it's body weight. I mean, weightlifting or calisthenics, whatever it is. You know, a lot of people really enjoy from an artistic, and like I can argue that it's from an artistic perspective. They're trying to create an art form by weightlifting. If they spend most of the time in this, their body is going to adapt to that, and there's no way around it. I mean, and like I have talked to a lot of the people that you're talking about. I shouldn't say a lot, one or two, and the, usually the thing is that, oh, since it hasn't been done, it doesn't mean that it can't be done. Just because it hasn't been done, it doesn't mean that it can't be done.
Right.
However, and this is something that time will tell. I don't know. My intuition tells me that regardless of how how much you, a lot of times, because just like you mentioned earlier, breathing is also another functional. Uh, it's another function of breathing correctly is another function of being human, and unfortunately, a lot of us have lost it. And so just just because you know how to breathe correctly, but then you spend a lot of time in these like artistic expression style of movement, like bodybuilding or whatever, your body is going to adapt to that. And your body adapt, like, and it just, to me, as through experience, it has appeared that the more I spend on adapting to things that are not in the foundations of running, walking, throwing, breathing, the more I spent time on that, that's when the pain and the discomfort start coming around. I mean, there are times that I spend a lot of time, you know, doing Muay Thai or dancing, and sometimes I don't get any time, you know, doing my breathing exercise, my posture exercises, and my, you know, deep tissue massage. Um, and I feel it. Like it doesn't take long for my body to fall back into the dysfunctions. You know, in boxing, for example, you kind of keep one side lower than the other as you're doing it, and like if I don't, then I start, even in boxing I see compensations show up. You know, I see all of a sudden, if I've been doing it for a while and I haven't been taking care of my body, all of a sudden I look at my footage and my shoulders are too high or they're
Mm.
too tense, or you know, I'm crunching a little bit and my spine is not long, because it's just my body's just adapting to that specific demand. And um, yeah, so I don't know. I think it's something that time will tell, whether it's whether the whether the body can just do things outside of its function and then just continue doing those without pain. I don't know. I don't know. My intuition tells me that it's not going to happen like that, that you for sure need to like keep your foundation strong and focus more on the foundations than you do on the extracurricular movement.
The artistic
However,
expression.
yeah, exactly, artistic expression.
So these are kind of like the biomechanical definitions of functional fitness. These are terms of like the function. We talked a little bit about the breathing. We talked about the standing, walking, running, throwing. Evolutionary biomechanics, how it relates to how a human being would have survived, and then prioritizing that as the baseline. Because when you prioritize that as the baseline, you don't have pain, you don't have other issues, you don't have mechanical tweaks and funkiness, and you're less susceptible to injury. And this is, this is both of our experience and the experience of most of the people that we've worked with and talked to as well. And I'm also curious with the whole idea of like, just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean that it can't be done idea of, you know can you weightlift a lot and not develop biomechanical inefficiencies or postural issues? Right. I think I'm not against resistance training. I'm not against strength training. I'm not against anything. I'm very much a context driven person, and what's medicine for one person is poison for another, kind of thing. But I do think that human beings also have pretty universal baseline consistencies in terms of structure. Barring extreme exceptions, that the human being on average as a species has a structure, something that you can kind of look at and identify as like, we have certain biomechanical relevance for certain parts of our body and certain systems in our body. So that's sort of the biomechanical side. And I'd kind of like to talk to you a little bit about the psychospiritual side of what functional fitness is, because now we're kind of redefining function and we're defining fitness in different ways, right? Fitness in terms of the biomechanical sphere, what we were talking about was the readiness to accomplish a certain task or the readiness to handle a certain demand. And from a psychospiritual perspective, that could mean something completely different. Psychological fitness and emotional fitness and spiritual fitness, these are things that mean different things to different people. And I don't think I've spent as much of a time defining, because again, like I did over 100 episodes of The Art of Move trying to find a grand unified theory of human movement and biomechanics. Still nowhere close. But I have like more of a structural framework of some first principle ideas to kind of work from. So in terms of a psychospiritual function and a psychospiritual fitness, how do you kind of relate those into the rest of your overall practice?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is your nervous system tone. So a lot of times people will come in like, I haven't slept. I haven't slept in forever. I'm taking anti-anxiety pills, and I have to take, like pills to go to sleep and this and that. And I want a beach body, and it's like, well, clearly your mentally, your nervous system is not there. You're not ready to take on the work that it takes for you to have a beach body. Which, I mean, I'm not saying that I like even entertain the idea of a beach body. I'm just saying that a lot of times people are not ready for the work, right? So I think, so I look at a person and they come in, they haven't slept in forever, they haven't had a good night's sleep in months, their work is beating them up, they're just really tired from work, they're exhausted, stressed out, and they're in a fight or flight mode. And so that the first thing that I think about is this person needs to calm down, and it's not too, I mean, you could kind of call this physical activity, but it's more about like, just getting this person to deal with their stress in a different way, to handle and manage their day-to-day life so that they can actually be calm and enjoy, and not only enjoy, perform better, that they can enhance their life. So a lot of times people come in and they're in this stress state, and they're asking for, a for a certain type of body or a certain outcome, and you're like, okay, well, the first thing we need to do is you're gonna lay down and breathe. We're gonna do like, we're doing 2 hours of breathing. The first 2 weeks we're gonna just breathe, and usually they're like, that's not what I came here for, you know what I mean? And you have to explain to them that, your body's in fight or flight mode right now. If you pick up any weight, if you do try to do any dynamic movement, your risk of injury is super high, right? And so and this is something that's been super interesting to me, that your mental state can show itself through your physical, as a physical outcome, right? Like a lot of times get injured, like, and they're like, oh, it was just how I stepped, I misstepped. But it's like, oh, they don't consider the fact that they've been eating like shit, that haven't been sleeping, that their work is stressing them out. You know what I mean? All these things are what actually contributes to an injury, not a misstep. You
Mm.
know, the misstep is kind of like your body just fell out of, and even like even the fact that you misstepped could be because of the fact that your brain is somewhere else. You know?
It's the 100 missteps in your life leading up to that step that you missed, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and this is interesting because this is kind of like top down, bottom up approach conversation that I've been having a lot in my house lately with my roommates and my friends, and just with a bunch of other people in general. Is like, in terms of mental state, there are perspectives that you can handle your physiology to change your mental state. And I think this is very, very valid. It's incredibly true that if you are in a mentally distressed state, if you're experiencing depression, if you're experiencing poor mental and emotional health, and like you said, you're in this chronic fight or flight state, handling your physiology first is probably one of the fastest ways to set the grounds to get out of it. You're going to be chronically stressed if you're getting less than 7 hours of sleep a night. You're going to be chronically stressed if you're eating inflammatory foods all the time. And if you're consuming massive amounts of attention span depleting social media and garbage information. You're going to be highly stressed if you're constantly in reaction mode. You're going to be highly stressed if you have a shallow breathing pattern. You're going to be highly stressed if you're chronically exposed to blue light and your circadian rhythm is out of whack. You're going to feel stressed if you have endocrine disrupting lotions and perfumes and all other, like synthetic materials that, inhibit your natural hormone production. These are things that, and by the way, you're also going to be in a chronic state of stress if your posture is out of whack and if you're constantly in pain. Like if you haven't addressed the fact that your body is in pain and that just existing hurts, that is a form of constant stress. That is a form of mental strain. There's no way that you can actually focus on the present moment and access transcendental states of consciousness independent of external sources if you are too busy focusing on the fact that, holy shit, my body hurts. That's always nagging in the back of your mind or in the front of your mind, frankly. And everything else becomes kind of on the back burner, and you're sort of in this survival state of consciousness. You're in a very low energy state of consciousness when you're trying to deal with all of this stuff. So physiologically, it's sort of like, before you can even get to a state of mental excellence or mental clarity or mental acuity to the degree that you would want to maybe say accomplish your goals or like become a more accomplished version of yourself or a more self-actualized version of yourself, you need to address your physiology first. And you need to be able to learn how to, you can regulate your nervous system with a few good deep breaths and getting very, very present. And you can downregulate that stress tremendously by learning how to breathe and slowing your breathing down alone. There is a tremendous amount of choice that human beings have in regulating their stress. I think what ends up happening is our attention spans go so far out, and then we deplete our physiological resources in terms of lack of sleep, in terms of desensitizing our dopamine sensors with excessive media consumption, and we constantly eat inflammatory hyperstimulating foods that just screw our ability to be present up, that is constantly like dragging us down, that we don't even have the capacity to be present with ourselves enough to question or develop deeper relationship to self and to our minds. And so that's the physiological perspective. I'm going to flip that on its head, though, and say that people who only focus on handling their physiological stuff, people who are doing nervous system regulation work, people who are doing somatic therapy and not doing any integration work afterwards, people who are like even sitting under a sandbag and doing the breathing and getting into these fight or flight stressful states and calming their nervous system down actively, that doesn't mean a thing if you're not actively also working on your interpersonal and internal relationship to self and to others.
100%. Yeah, I mean, the mental, like talking about your relationship with yourself, right? If you're not performing well at work, or if you're not getting the results that you want, if you're doing a job that you don't love, right? Like a lot of people go to work and they hate it, and they're every day they wake up and like, no, fuck this again, you know? If you're living that kind of a life, you've got a highly stressed life, and that's going to that's going to have negative effects on your physiology, but it's more this is something that I've learned recently, is that like you got to keep the balance. You know, you got to keep healthy in all these aspects of life for you to be a truly fit person. Because if you're not, if your relationships are bad, say you're constantly fighting with your wife, or things are not good at home, or you're not performing well at work, or you hate your job, you're doesn't matter how much you go to the gym, doesn't matter how many breathing exercises you do, you're going to not be able to get the best results out of your life. And you know what, it might even show itself up as some sort of disease, cancer, injury, you know, inflammation, and all these other things. And you know, a lot of people don't think it's related. A lot of people don't realize the relationship between having a healthy relationship with yourself, a healthy relationship with your work, with your people, with the people around you, and all of this kind of contributes to your physical health as well, to your fitness. You
Hmm.
know, it's how do you relate to your tribe? I mean, we are community driven, human beings are, and so we need to we need to be in a community. We need to have healthy relationships if we want to be fit, right? We need to have some people to go hunting with, and people to defend us if there's a predator coming, you know.
And there are physiological and neurochemical end products to every emotion that you feel, to every bit of social contact that you experience. And one thing that I remind people of all the time is that in the same way that you can get addicted to a baseline level of caffeine or a baseline level of nicotine or a baseline level of an exogenous substance that is painful and difficult to come off of, like this is what the foundation of addiction is, just your homeostasis becomes dependent on a certain baseline level of chemicals. If there's a chemical end product to every emotion that you feel, if you're used to being chronically stressed, or you're used to being an angry, combative, vitriolic person, or you're used to being, like anxious all the time, that has a physiological homeostasis associated with it. And so every time you're trying to change outside of every time you're trying to create change, you're literally trying to overcome a chemical addiction to a version of self that you had previously embodied.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is the whole thing where it's like, yeah, you're changing your physiology from the outside with movement and with exercise and stuff. But if your brain is literally addicted to the cortisol of stress and the dopamine you get from antagonizing other people or from trying to tear other people down, if that's where you get your dopamine from, then you're going to be an addict who's going through withdrawal when you try to stop those behaviors. And your brain, trying to get a fix of the chemical that it's addicted to, is going to feed you thoughts associated with certain emotions to get you to feel those emotions and create those chemicals again. So even if you're trying to be a super zen person and you're normally an angry person in reality in your life, and you're trying to make change, your brain is going to be fed all kinds of antagonizing things to make you angry. So it'll get that rise out of you so that you can reach that comfortable level of homeostasis. It's like the comfort and discomfort physiologically that people experience is a part of their, is a piece of this sort of emotional, spiritual fitness puzzle to me.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Yeah, it's hard to believe that people would be addicted to, you know, cortisol, but it really is a thing. I've met a lot of people who are constantly sick, for example, and at first I'm like, oh, this at first, few years ago, I'd be like, oh, this person just has a weak immune system, you know, and they just constantly get sick. And then upon, you know, working with these kind of people, I've realized that a lot of times it's actually an addiction. It's that they're seeking it out. They're seeking being sick because of whatever reason. Sometimes people, you know, they didn't get any love when they were children, and the only time they received any attention was when they're sick, you know.
Mm.
It could be a lot of different things, but ultimately it does become an addiction. And people do get addicted to a lot of what we would consider like negative or not fun things to be
Mm.
addicted to, you know? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, I understand if someone's addicted to, I don't know, cocaine or something, or ecstasy or something, because it's fun, right? But then how does someone get addicted to being sick, or how
But
does someone get
even that, I
addicted to
mean,
being
you have
angry?
drug addicts who the drug destroys their entire life, and they don't
Hmm.
want to do it anymore because it's destroying the quality of their entire life. You know, a person who is doing coke all the time, or even ecstasy all the time, you know, you get the high, but eventually the high gets lower and lower and lower, and then you're just basically doing it to kind of get to this like sort of baseline.
Hmm.
You know, anyone who's been addicted to anything hard knows or has experienced that it's like, I don't want to do this, but I have to, you know. And that's where it's like it steals your core essence, it snuffs you out in a hard way. And it's like
Hmm.
this unconscious driver to do this thing that doesn't serve you. And in the same way, a person who doesn't want to be an angry person or a sad person or a depressed person or you know, a victimized person, they have to overcome the addiction to this particular state of being, this personal identity that they have. And it's going to be tough. You know, there's going to be a physiological resistance to making that change because the homeostasis that your body has been, and it's conditioning, right? Like all of this is conditioning. And this is where the idea of like your mind lives in your body lives in your mind. We were talking a little bit before we hit the record button about these studies that I was reading about in the book Reading Fire by, I think, Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler, where people who do Botox and people who have depression specifically who do Botox on their frown lines, they make it impossible for them to frown, have this miraculous cure of their depression, meaning that the actual face that a person makes sends signals to, like, the actual body language that you have sends signals to your nervous system and creates physiological responses to create a state of mind. And people who have their face frozen entirely and can't do any facial movements and have very little movement in their face and can't mirror the facial expressions of other people that they're in conversation with have a marked decrease in empathy to the point where they can't even relate emotionally to other people anymore. Because typically how human beings relate to one another, we'll see another person's facial expressions, we pick up on all these subconscious cues of body language, even if we can't describe them and we haven't developed a language for it ourselves. Subconsciously we're processing how another person feels, less from how they're taught what they're saying, and more from how they're saying it and how their body language is and the tone of their voice and the cadence and all these other subconscious cues. These are all feeding our nervous systems and our mirror neurons when we're witnessing another person. And that's how we develop empathy, and how we feel our own emotions and other people's is through our bodies. And, you know, in the same book, they were kind of talking about the TED Talk where it's like you do the Wonder Woman pose with your legs spread out and your hands on your hips, and you stand up tall, and it increases your testosterone and it decreases your cortisol. And you actually have physiological responses to different levels of posture. So when you get like a bodybuilder who's flexing and he's like doing the thing, like that probably has a physiological change on his mind as well, or her mind as
Hmm.
well. And we know that through our bodies, we change our minds. But likewise, with our minds, we can change our bodies. Like you can think a certain thought. You know, we have this default mode network that when we're not focused and present on a task, there's some mental chatter that just kind of pops up. And oftentimes, even the default mode network will just while you're trying to do something else. And if you get caught with a certain memory of something, or you have to think, you're thinking about something that you have to do, or you just get caught with a thought that makes you feel a strong emotion, now you've created strong physiological responses in your system based on the chemical end product of the emotion that you felt from the random thought that you had. And the more that you think certain types of thoughts, and the more that you condition yourself to feel particular emotions, like what's your emotional baseline at? Because that's the state of consciousness that your default mode network is going to be feeding you random thoughts. And so it could be because it's trying to reinforce the neurological or the neurochemical baseline that you have, right? And
Hmm.
so that to me is like, if you're doing all this work on your body, you're trying to do all this nervous system regulation work, and you can actively calm yourself down when you're in a fight or flight stressed situation, in a fitness setting, in a workout capacity, but you haven't addressed your thinking patterns. You haven't addressed your homeostasis of certain emotional baselines. Then, you know, you got to do both. It's not either or, it's both and.
Yeah, 100%. And you said something that I want to touch on is regardless of how many times you do this, all these nervous system regulation and stress reduction and stress management in the gym, if you can't carry that outside, if you can't effectively bring that into your life outside the gym, then it doesn't matter. Just like how if there's no need for a back squat or a deadlift in your life outside the gym, it doesn't matter how much you can deadlift or squat. It's the same. It doesn't matter how long you can spend under a sandbag, how long you can stay in an ice bath. If you can't carry the lesson of the particular activity to outside of the gym, because that's when it matters, right? Like, we're not just going to the gym for the sake of going to the gym, like a lot of people are, because going back to addiction, a lot of people just are addicted to going to the gym. But in reality, we're not just doing that to just be able to go to the gym. We're doing it so that life outside the gym can be good, right? Now, I can spend all day under a sandbag and then come out and yell at my loved ones, or you know get angry at a random car beside me because they cut me off. What good is all the things that I did, right? It's really important to like emphasize that just training it doesn't really training it is kind of like a lesson. You can
Mm-hmm.
learn the lesson, and then now it's like, can you apply this lesson outside of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get in this crazy fight or flight when you're under 200-pound sandbag, right? And your breathing shortens and you feel all this stress, and now you've learned that you can, with your breathing, with your mind, calm yourself down. Okay, now you get outside and someone cuts you off in traffic and you're like, ah, and it's like, okay, well, that the lesson is that when you're uncomfortable, you can breathe, you can calm yourself down so you don't react to that, right? And it
Well,
goes with our loved ones, it goes with everybody. I mean, it goes, you can apply it to real life. It's not
and
just for the gym.
you have to be deliberate about applying the real life scenario. The other thing is, like, you can calm yourself down after you've been worked up. The question is, do you have the wherewithal to learn the places that work you up? And I think you're not avoiding reactivity at that point. You're just learning how to calm yourself back down after you've been worked up. You're
Mm-hmm.
after you've had this trigger, after you've snapped at the person or snarled your teeth at someone and yelled at someone, or like freaked out at the guy who cut you off, kind of thing, after you fought the random internet guy, and you worked yourself up. Can you calm yourself back down and get back to what's actually important? That's the skill that you're training. You're not training non-reactivity. You're not training mental reframing. You're not training compassion. You're not training empathy. You're not training emotional intelligence. You're not training social skills and communication and coherence within yourself. These are all things that require top-down approaches and a deeper relationship with yourself, your patterning, your values. And then I actually think, like, once those are kind of established, once you know what it is who you want to be, the person that you want to be, then you have to work on conditioning yourself to be that person. You
Mm-hmm.
have to decondition all the things that are not that, and to recognize that, like, within your body, within your mind, um, and the way that those overlap and intersect, there's a tremendous amount of conditioning which is inhibiting you from behaving in the ways that you think would be conducive to the life that you want to live.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to approach both the top down and the bottom up situation equally and concurrently. You have to improve your functional foundation, your biomechanics, so that you don't have pain and you're not fucked up by that. You have to handle your physiology and get enough sleep and eat good food, and not be under artificial lights all day, and handle your circadian health. You have to also learn how to communicate with people in healthy, functional ways. You have to learn how to communicate effectively so that you can feel understood and that you can understand other people, and you can develop empathy and emotional intelligence, so that when you're existing as a social creature, you're not stressing yourself out all the time by getting into fights and getting angry at people because they don't understand you, or getting angry at people because you don't understand them. These are all things that you have to develop concurrently if you want to get your beach body.
100%. I mean, that's true fitness. It's not just how you look. Um, I mean, we've seen so many people with impressive bodies that end up like as soon as their career ends, they end up with drugs, or they end up, with lots of life issues, or in jail or something like that. And it's like, to me, those people are not really fit. Like, yeah, their body looks cool, but that's about it. Like, fitness goes beyond just the way your body looks. It's your social interactions, your conversations with yourself, your mind, state of mind, like, really matters. And yeah, it's like, it's really important how we think about these things, because a lot of times the problem the problem is that people will not have the ability to even take in, like, when they're seeking physical fitness, right? they're they're not mentally there. They're not there to even be in a place to accept physical fitness. You know what I mean? It's like,
Mhm.
you can't become physically fit if you're an alcoholic. It's just not going to happen, right? And that's an underlying thing that you have to deal with before even stepping into the gym. It's like, it's your state of mind. It's You have to deal with that first, you
Well,
know?
and even addressing what you said before, where you're getting a person to breathe for a couple of hours before they get into anything. Like, let's take a less drastic example of, like, you're not going to be fit if you're an alcoholic. It's like, dude, you're not going to be fit if you're a total stress case and you're an
Yeah,
angry person, and
yeah,
you're constantly battling. Your recovery resources are constantly being consumed by being in fight and flight, and you're not sleeping and recovering well, and you're not nourishing your body with healthy foods. Like, if you're you're just and likewise, you're not going to be a mentally healthy person if you're not addressing the foundations of function and the foundations of health. So it's both and.
yeah. It's like, it's from both sides. If you go to the gym and you're getting constantly injured because of the dumb exercises that you're doing, or you're super, like, I mean, it's hard to be, but let's just say you're super fit, but you're stressed out all outside, just screaming at people and being angry online. Is it's you're not going, I mean, you might get some results, but for me, getting some results is not very reasonable, because I think we all have very high potential. And it's like, your body looks cool, but are you at your fullest potential, which is super important.
And, like, the answer for every human being that's ever lived is no, you're not at your fullest potential. And
Well,
that's,
yeah.
like, you never will be. But the idea of your fullest potential is an ideal that you can still anchor to and look at. And for me, I look at a lot of the things that, like, what is it that I have to do to progress towards that? But are also, like, what are the levels of embodiment and the behaviors and the character traits that I have that are inhibiting me from that? And allowing myself to really look critically and seek information about the things that are holding me back from actualizing into that potential. And for a lot of people, it's just like, you're not like, you don't have to get fancy with that. Like, for me, I still look at just, like, basic lifestyle factors. Like, how could I be eating a little bit better? How could I sleep a little bit better? How could I get out in the sun? How can I, like, do I have to set an alarm clock for a little while and get out in the sunrise to sync my circadian rhythm again, so that I'm just, like, falling asleep and waking up at the same time every night?
Hmm.
How can I dial in the basics even more, and then seeking out information about the basics, and just audit. Not that you have to get neurotic and audit yourself, but, like, oh, I'm doing these 40 million things wrong, because you are. Like, the reality is, we all do, like, stupid fucked up shit all the time. All the time. We're human beings. We're always holding ourselves back in a million different ways. But ironically, the more that you focus on that, the more resistance you generate, and the less you're able to work on your strengths as well. So it's like a little bit of a both and. So on that note, man, we kind of talked about, just to summarize the breadth of things that we talked about, we kind of defined function as the readiness and ability to handle certain tasks, or uh, physical or novel changes or challenges in the environment. And
Sorry, I think
that's how we
you
define
misspoke.
fitness.
Yeah, fitness, correct.
Yeah, and then function was as it pertained to functional fitness specifically, the functions that are native to human evolutionary biomechanics and the anthropological bias of us being organisms that are trying to survive. The evolutionary bias of that, and for human beings, that is specialized in throwing mechanics, standing mechanics, in terms of our posture, of running, of walking, of sprinting, and then everything else aside from that foundation is a specialized function. And so any function that orients itself as a specialized function outside of that foundation, we also talked about breathing and we talked about nervous system regulation as functions as well. But anything that orients around outside of that is more specialized to specific tasks and not necessarily native to the functions that are relevant to the human organism. And then beyond that, we talked about the top down versus bottom up approach of how your body affects your mind and how your mind affects your body, and how making changes in the gym doesn't necessarily translate to making changes in your relationships or in your personal relationship to self, and that your mental and emotional state is contingent not only on your ability to think better and handle yourself better, but also realizing that the way that you think is currently conditioned in your body is a physiological homeostasis, a neurochemical homeostasis. And that when you're trying to change the way you think and you try to change your mental state and your personality, you're going to be coming up against sort of addictive withdrawal to this neurophysiological, neurochemical state that you're in. And it all has to happen concurrently. You can't just address one or the other. It has to be both and. Is there anything else that I missed there that you think was like extra relevant, or anything else that you want to add on to what we talked about today?
No, I think you got it all. It's pretty dead on.
Nice. So if people want to continue hearing these conversations, because we're going to keep having them, keep watching Ali and I chat about this stuff, because we're diving back into the world of biomech and we want to keep having these conversations and get into more specific stuff. If there are specific conversations that you want us to have, you can leave a comment in the video here. You can shoot us a message on Instagram. I am at anthony.manuel, Manuele, and Ali is Muvmental. Or do you have an E at the end of move? MUVE.
Yeah, MUVE, correct.
Yeah, so move mental with a U instead of an O. And you can hit us up on Instagram as well. You can follow us. You can send us a DM to let us know what you want to hear us talk about in the world of functional fitness, biomechanics, and just the human experience as a whole, movement training, the whole 9 yards. And anything else that you want to shoot over at the audience and let them know about that you're working on right now?
That's it, man.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
And if you guys are out in the Montreal area, if you're out in the city of Montreal, you got to go check out the Sapien Evolution Temple where Ali puts on classes with his business partner Max. It's super, super good stuff. He's applying everything that we're talking about in full form. He has cool classes. You just launched your Yin classes recently, which are really, really cool.
Yeah, it's basically a remedy to what we were just talking about. A lot of stressed out people, and movement is not necessarily the first thing they should focus on. So we've kind of provided a solution, and it's more yin, meaning as opposed to yin and yang. So it's more calming, more chill out type of a class, which I haven't seen anywhere. So I can confidently say it's the first in Montreal. However, I don't know if it's worldwide or not, but definitely the first in Montreal.
Well, I've never seen anyone doing the specific combination of stuff that you're doing anywhere. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be pretty unique to anywhere you go. So if you're in Montreal, go check that out. Sapien Evolution Temple. They're also on Instagram. And guys, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. Really stoked to be having these conversations again. And we'll catch you on the next episode.
Bye.